Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to begin today and welcome everyone to the Staying Resilient and Delivering Patient Care webinar hosted by HCET. My name is Megan Arias and I am the training manager at HCET and will be facilitating the webinar today. Let me briefly introduce you to healthcare education and training. HCET's mission is to provide comprehensive program development, education, and training to improve reproductive and sexual health outcomes. And HCET is an organization of passionate people who are proactive in their belief that access to evidence-based, medically accurate, reproductive and sexual health education, training, and care is a fundamental right. And for more information and to keep up to date with HCET events, please be sure to follow HCET on these various social media platforms and visit our website. Now I will quickly go over a couple of housekeeping information. So a link to complete an event evaluation will be sent to you in the chat right now, as well as at the end of this webinar. And again, in an email following this webinar. And your feedback is greatly appreciated. So we encourage you to participate in that evaluation. And you can find archived presentations and a list of upcoming events on our website at hcet.org. And if you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please reach out to myself at the email listed on the screen. Next slide, please. And the presenter does not disclose any actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. And throughout the presentation, we encourage you to send your questions via the chat box. And to submit a question, you are going to hover over the main screen and then select the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. And once that's selected, the chat box should appear on the right side of your screen. And to send a question at any time during the presentation, please send it to all panelists. And this ensures that everyone who needs to can view your question. And we will hold all questions, reading and answering those until the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Robin Mattheis. Robin is an experienced leader with a demonstrated history of working in government, higher education, and public health. She is skilled in training facilitation, positive psychology, leadership development, trauma-informed care, health promotion, and prevention efforts. Robin is innovative, thoughtful, and thorough, and she earned her Master's of Social Work focused in children, youth, and family policy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So without further ado, I will be passing things over to Robin.
Thank you so much, Megan. And as Megan said, I am Robin Mattheis. I am currently the Director of Public and Behavioral Health Integration with an organization called the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, which is a national organization that supports public health agencies across the country. Prior to that, some of you I may know on this, I worked at the Department of Health Services doing work around adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and resilience. So if my name is familiar, that might be from where. So a quick agenda for today. I'm assuming many of you, if not all of you, have heard of adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. So I'm not going to go very far into that, but I am going to do a very, very brief overview just to sort of get us the foundational piece of where we're going with the rest of the information in this presentation. I'll then talk a bit about trauma-informed care, what that means, what that looks like, and how we can start engaging in trauma-informed practices in our, well, for all of you in clinics and or in other agencies that you work in. And then I'm going to talk about building resilience, and that's going to be pretty specific to you all. Obviously, very much things you could suggest to your patients, but the most important thing that I've realized and that I've learned through plenty of research is that in order to truly be able to support your patients in becoming more resilient, it's important that you yourself are practicing that as well. So we will get into some tips and tools of how you can do that in a way that does not feel cumbersome or overwhelming, and things that you could just really incorporate into your day-to-day starting today. So with that, I'm going to do, like I said, a very quick overview of adverse childhood experiences. Um, First and foremost, if you look at this infographic here, you can see that on the top are a list of adverse childhood experiences. And just for anyone who may not have heard or just needs a refresher, adverse childhood experiences are experiences that happen before the age of 18 years old, and they are experiences that cause traumatic stress, especially to a young person, that are connected to poor health outcomes and risk behaviors. So one thing that I really think is an important takeaway is that the adverse childhood experiences study is just that. It was a study. So it took 10 different forms of adversity someone could experience in childhood and surveyed people to see how many people had experienced them. Important to note is that obviously that's a non-exhaustive list, and there's plenty of things that people, young people especially, can experience that would also be considered an ACE. So if you look at the bottom of the infographic in adverse community environments, things like poverty, discrimination, racism, witnessing violence outside of the home, bullying, all of those things are also what we would consider toxic stress and or ACEs. And so when I show you a very small amount of data, or when you see ACE data, you can assume that it's actually lower than what it would be if there was a exhaustive list of all of the things that could cause trauma and toxic stress for young people. So just bear that in mind as I go through this. So just a reminder, 59% of Wisconsin residents have at least one ACE. So that means that if you are in a room full of people, which many of us aren't at this point, but if and when you are, or if you were to look at the group that is on this webinar, you would note that over half of them are likely to have at least one ACE based on data. And this data comes from the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey, which is a survey that goes out every year out of the Department of Health Services. And it basically asks people who are over, it doesn't basically ask, it does ask people who are over the age of 18 what their experiences were when they were under the age of 18. So it's a retrospective look. One more data slide for you, because I think it's good and it's linked to the rest of this presentation. So this is ACE score and current smoking. So you can see in 2017, 18, the general population in Wisconsin was smoking at 16%. And individuals with 0 ACEs were smoking at 10%, so under that of the general population. And individuals with 4 or more ACEs were smoking at 32%, or twice that of the general population. And I found this really compelling and did a little bit of extra digging and found that then 74% of all people who smoke in Wisconsin have at least one ACE. And I want to tell a small story here about the doctors who created the ACE study. One of them was working with a group of women who were overweight and wanted to lose weight. And he provided them all these tips and tools on how to lose weight, and everyone in the group lost weight. And after the group ended, they went on their way. This doctor follows up with them a few months later, and most of all of the women had gained the weight back, and he was kind of perplexed and did interviews with each of them saying, how did this happen? You know, I gave you all these tips and tools to lose the weight, and what happened here? What were your barriers? And it turned out that most of the women had experienced significant trauma when they were younger, and this had become a coping mechanism for them. And so he realized in that moment, and this is kind of how the ACE study came about, that you can give people all the tips and tools you want to reduce behaviors that impact your body negatively. But if you don't look at the root causes of why they started in the first place and unpack those, it's going to be really, really difficult for people who are almost using them as armor, if you would, to protect them from whatever their experiences were in the past. And so that brings me back to 74% of people who smoke in Wisconsin have at least one ACE. So I'm sure many of you know that in Wisconsin or nationally, if someone wants to quit smoking, they're usually given a quit line number to call. They call a quit line and they talk to a counselor on the line, who gives them all these tips and tools to quit smoking, and sometimes even nicotine replacement therapy or other things that could help them along the way. But what they don't do, and what they're not trained to do, is ask them why they started smoking in the first place and really unpack the root cause of what caused the smoking behavior in the first place. And so that's why we see such high numbers here of people who have experienced ACEs still smoking. And this is across the board. It's not just smoking, but it's also any kind of risky behavior, drug and alcohol use, things like that. So the point to take away here is that if we're not looking at the underlying causes of what causes the behavior and really unpacking those, individuals who are using this as a coping mechanism to protect themselves from whatever their previous experiences are going to have a lot more of a difficult time finding ways to stop using that coping mechanism. So that brings me to this idea of upstream prevention. And I think this is a concept that many people have probably heard of, but we do live in a world where our go-to is what we would consider intervention. So if someone is struggling, we usually, especially nurses and clinical practitioners, usually get those folks when they're already struggling and or in crisis. And if not, you get warning signs that are showing you that they have health conditions that might be pointing them in that direction. And all of that's important. We need interventions. We need to respond to people who might be in crisis or struggling with some sort of behavior that is causing them negative health outcomes. And this is a really great graphic out of Wisconsin that was created at the Department of Health Services that kind of goes through the different layers of prevention, from tertiary prevention, which is really the crisis intervention when someone is in trouble and needs help immediately and needs some sort of crisis type services, to secondary prevention, which is when folks are struggling, but there's still time to respond. They're not yet in crisis, and there may be ways to mitigate the harms that are being caused by whatever behavior and or health outcome they're experiencing. And then there's primary prevention or upstream prevention. And that's really when we're catching it before it even occurs, that we have enough information that tells us that if someone's experienced something, especially at a young age, and we offer them some sort of support or different protective factors, and there's a variety of those, and we can talk about them in a bit. Um, then they're going to be less likely to go down the path where they're going to need that critical crisis intervention that is sort of like I said, the go-to when we as providers um, are stepping in. And I say that because I do believe that, and I'm not sure of everyone who's on this webinar and what all of you do specifically, but for those of you who are practitioners, obviously, I know that you think about and talk about primary prevention and how to support patients so they don't get to that point. But the time when we act most quickly and most vigilantly is in that tertiary prevention space, when we need to get them the help they need immediately. So we're trying to avoid having to do that more than having to do the things that come along with primary prevention. And that's why ACEs is so important in this conversation and in this discussion, because as I stated earlier, 59% of individuals have experienced at least one ACE. And the more ACEs someone experiences, and especially when you get to that 4 or more, their risk of negative health outcomes goes up significantly. And I didn't show this data, but 15% of Wisconsin residents have experienced 4 or more ACEs. So that's 1 in 5 people. And that's significant. And if we're not in place to be providing some of those primary prevention efforts on the front end, then we will be doing that on the back end. So that is a very quick overview of ACEs. And now I'm going to talk about trauma-informed care. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this term before. It is a response to adverse childhood experiences. And it's really an organizational structure and treatment framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. Becoming trauma informed really means recognizing that people often have many different traumas in their lives, or have had, or are currently having, and people who have been traumatized need support and understanding from those around them. It provides a new perspective for people to really start thinking about all of the reasons that people experience different health or different risk behaviors and negative health outcomes, why people behave the way they behave, why people have some, different impulses than others. And so it's kind of taking universal precautions almost, and assuming that anyone you encounter, patients or otherwise, have experienced some sort of trauma and treating them as such. So I am going to, hopefully this works, show a video. It's a really good video, takes place in a hospital, and it's clinical in nature, but what I want you to do is to think about yourselves, people in your life, patients, anyone and everyone, because this is pretty relatable. And then afterwards, I'm going to kind of ask a few rhetorical questions about it. So here we go. Okay. Um, if folks are willing, and I know we had talked about not going on to, well, me not going on to chat and answering anything, but if you could just type into the chat just some words of how that video made you feel, like what were the feelings that it brought up for you when you watched it? And maybe as folks type, oh, okay, now they're coming in. I was gonna talk, but it made someone sad, mixed feelings. Melissa, if you're willing, will you type a few more words in to expand on that? And as that happens, I will just say that I've shown this video to many people, and both virtually and not. And I've heard similar things from folks who see it, that it resonates. Like all of us have had experiences that we can kind of relate to this, and or we know someone who's had experiences that can kind of relate to this. Um, yes, Mel, you never know what people are going through, and that's another thing that comes up. So we do walk through life seeing people and getting the information that is presented to us by those people, and or in some cases a chart that talks about those people, but we definitely do not have a whole picture of their story and what they've experienced. And it's so important and crucial um, to remember that, and to be able to take a step back and know that there's a whole person there, and that we don't have that whole story. And it's easy to come to judgment, and there is no judgment here to the fact that we all do experience and have judgment on other people. We all come with implicit biases, and it is just important to recognize that, but try and bear in mind that we do not have the full story. Um, like know that Megan followed up, grateful to be healthy, saddened by other struggles. Yes, all of those things. That video does evoke empathy for many people, and it's a difficult one to watch because there's both wonderful and amazing things happening, and then also very sad and devastating things, and it kind of gets all the emotions going at once. Um, so yeah, it looks like everyone is saying the same things. And someone here says, I've been in those situations as a nurse. It really touches your feelings and your heart. Absolutely. I know that anyone who's a practicing or a practitioner here has seen a lot of this, knows a lot of this, and this is probably resonates quite a bit for you. And even if you're in a clinic and you're having your best day because something has gone really well in your life, you're still potentially talking to people who are not having their best days or who are experiencing things that are pretty horrible. And if you yourself are experiencing things that are also really difficult, that compiles. And that's when we really internalize some of that secondary trauma, and go towards that compassion fatigue, because we can only handle so much no matter who we are. And I love to say, and I really do believe, that practitioners are superheroes, and you have feelings, emotions, and a certain capacity to manage all of those. And then at some point, it can also become too much. So before I move on, I do want to say, and thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and feelings on the video. So trauma-informed care is really this approach to kind of shifting your paradigm, this idea of moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you to what's right with you. And really, the whole notion of what's wrong with you is part of the medical model, which is deeply, deeply ingrained in our culture. And I know that as practitioners, for anyone who's a practitioner, um, that is part of your role. But the medical model assumes the helper is the expert on just one thing. And there's so much more that can take place in an interaction with a patient, and moving from the what's wrong with you to the what happened to you. So if someone comes in and they're struggling with an addiction, instead of saying, "What's wrong with you?" which is kind of a judgment question, to "What happened to you?" There's a story there. What happened to you that got you to a place where you started using blank substance? And that's seems small sometimes, maybe that shift, but it really matters. It moves from the space of judgment. And I know as practitioners, it is your job to also say what brings you in, what are your symptoms. But when you get a situation that seems like there could be more to the story, I would very much encourage you to learn a little bit more. And I know time can be a difficult thing, and there's not a lot of time to spend with patients, especially probably right now. But when you have an opportunity, really just acknowledging that you know that they're human beings and that there's a story there. And then finally, moving to what's right with you. I think we're so quick to try and diagnose the problem, figure out what's going on, get them what they need, and out the door. And I don't say that in a bad way, but there's other patients waiting, and I know that there's a lot of balance there. That being said, even if ever so subtly you're able to say, "Tell me something good that's happening in your day," or if they talk about something good, really finding a way to capitalize on that. It doesn't just do good for them, it does good for you too. It reminds you that, again, they're a whole person who has plenty of different aspects that make them up, and some of those are good. And because they're often coming into clinic because they're not feeling good, or they're experiencing something that is difficult, or just coming in for a checkup, which even for the best of us typically gets our anxiety going a bit, and just being thoughtful of, this might be anxiety provoking. Tell me something good. And it seems like sometimes that doesn't come as easily, but there's definitely ways to improve on that skill set of looking toward what is going well in your life, even if it feels awkward or like it doesn't fit into the conversation. Okay, so I want to talk about building resilience now. And this is, like I said, this is going to be for you all. And you might wonder, well, wait a minute, what does this have to do with being a practitioner? But again, especially right now, given the circumstances that we're living in, and the pandemic and all of the heartache that is coming from it. And I can't even put myself in the shoes of a practitioner right now. I can't imagine being someone who's on the front lines. And I know that even just working in public health, I feel an extra amount of stress because I hear about the pandemic maybe more than some others do. Whatever the case may be, we are living in a time of extraordinary stress right now. It's unique. And the tips I'm about to give you and talk through are just for you to take on if you're interested and you want to help to build resilience and put you into a place where you're just sort of operating on a more centered level than the one exhausted end of COVID-19 and all that has come along with it. So, quickly, a definition of resilience, and there's plenty of definitions to go around, but I really like this one. Resilience is the ability to overcome challenges of all kinds and to bounce back stronger, wiser, and more personally powerful. And a pro tip, it's contagious. So when you are building your own resilience, other people in your life, including patients, will also be more likely to have those same experiences. And it it kind of just comes off of us. There's a ripple effect to it, and it's so crucial that you're taking care of yourselves while you're also taking care of patients, because they will get better care because of it. So here's some suggestions on things you can do. And this isn't one size fits all. I'm not suggesting that all of these will work for everybody, but sometimes we forget to explore what we might be able to do in short amounts of time that actually benefit us quite a bit. So I'm going to be pulling these from a book called The Happiness Advantage. And This is just a list of 7 ways to capitalize on our happiness daily and kind of, again, shifting from more of that negative space to a positive space. And this helps us and the people we care for, as I mentioned. So I'm going to read this quote. Because positive brains have a biological advantage over brains that are neutral or negative, this principle teaches us how to retrain our brains to capitalize on positivity and improve our productivity and performance. And I realize it says this principle, it should say these principles, and I apologize for that. But what I'm about to talk to you about are ways that you can actually retrain your brain to find a bit more positivity. And a bit more positivity can go a long way. So, first, meditation. Research shows that regular meditation can permanently rewire the brain, raise levels of happiness, lower stress, and improve immune function. And the coolest thing about it is that you can do it for 2 minutes a day and it will make a difference. Just 2 minutes. Imagine just taking 2 minutes, turning off your computer, taking a step outside, even though it's kind of cold out right now, but you know what I mean, and just breathing and focusing on your breath for 2 minutes. And if that's difficult for you, there are, I think, 1,532,000, I just made up that number, arbitrary, but there's so many apps on your phone for meditation that I would bet that even almost the most naysaying person could find something that worked for them around meditation. So 2 minutes a day, not a lot of effort for a lot of reward. Find something to look forward to. This is the second idea. Anticipating future rewards can actually light up the pleasure centers in your brain, much like the actual reward will. So if you see this picture here, this is a picture of a sunset. I took this picture and I love sunsets and sunrises, and living in Wisconsin is such a joy, especially because I'm in Madison and I have 2 lakes, and one of them gives me the sunrise and one of them gives me the sunset. And I'm pretty well known for if I'm on a work call or something like that, and I look outside and it is a certain color in the sky, I'm the one that's like, I gotta go. Something came up and I'm finding that sunset. And for me, it reminds me of something I love and something that's kind of greater than me, bigger than me. And when I see pictures of it or when I remember what I had seen the day or two before, it does provide me with that little spark of light that really shifts my ability to go from a pretty negative place to a more positive place. So, next, creating conscious acts of kindness. And this is the key word here is conscious. It must be deliberate and conscious to reap the most benefit. So, a long line of research has shown that acts of altruism or giving to friends and strangers alike decreases stress and strongly contributes to enhanced mental health. And this is something that is pretty easy, probably for practitioners to do because you see patients regularly, and there's so many things you can do that just is a little extra layer of kindness. It can be something as easy as saying, your hair looks nice, or I really like that sweater. You know, it's something so small, but something that can make a big difference. And not only does it impact you, but it impacts the person who's receiving that act of kindness. I don't know if any of you have ever been on a bus before. I'm guessing most, if not all. And I'm not sure if you've seen this, but there's this experience that either you get off the bus and go on your way, or someone on the bus says thank you to the bus driver. And then what happens after that? Everyone on the bus who's leaving says thank you to the bus driver. It's this amazing phenomenon that if one person says it, all the rest of the people say it afterwards. And again, there's this ripple effect to that, that the bus driver's receiving gratitude and other people are feeling that ability to give gratitude to someone else, which does something good for them as well. Next is infusing positivity into your surroundings. So this is so important. And for those of you who are working in clinic, having something around you that brings or sparks joy for you, maybe it's a picture of your family, maybe it's a picture of a sunset, maybe it's something else like a little stuffed animal. I don't know if my camera's on and you can see me, but I have this little narwhal sparkly guy on my desk, and he or she, they bring me joy. So the idea is that especially when we're working, we are in a situation where we're feeling extra stress. So having things around you is really crucial in being able to truly kind of find that joy in a moment of extra stress. Next up is exercise, and I probably don't have to tell all of you this, but physical activity can obviously boost mood and enhance our work performance in a number of ways. It improves motivation and feelings of mastery, reducing stress and anxiety, and helping us get into a flow. And that is so important. The endorphins that we produce when exercising really make a difference in our day to day. And I think oftentimes when we think of exercise, we think of, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour that you have to take out of your day to do this. But really, 10 minutes a day, research shows that if you can elevate your heart rate for 10 minutes a day, you will find positive results from that. And 10 minutes a day just doesn't sound as bad as an hour a day. But for those of you who can do an hour a day, major props to you. Um, Spending money, but not on stuff. So what does that mean? What it really means is don't forget to sometimes put stuff aside if you have extra money to do things with people you care about, to create memories that can be drawn upon in times of need. And it's not to say that you don't go buy the pair of shoes you love. I'm guilty of that, but just being thoughtful about where you spend your money, how you spend your money, and where you're going to reap the most benefit and reward. Another version of this is spending money on other people, which is called pro-social spending. And it also tends to boost positivity and happiness. That could be charitable donations to things that you really care about. It could be getting your friend or family member a meaningful gift. All of those things are going to do well by you and your mood and your positivity. Finally, exercising a signature strength. So you can see here pool balls, which is my example. I am secretly a pool shark. Not everyone knows that, but everyone who's seen this presentation does. And if I'm having a really bad day, and it is not COVID times, I will sometimes go to a place where there's a pool table and play a few games of pool. Remembering things we are good at or excel at and practicing it is a way to increase our confidence and actually improve our daily outcomes, especially if we're having a bad day. Each time we use a skill, whatever it is, we experience a burst of positivity. So if you find yourself in need of some sort of happiness booster, or revisit some sort of skill or talent that you haven't used in a while, and you will find the benefits of that. And so those are very quickly 7 things that you can do to sort of shift your day-to-day outcomes. I want to bring up something called a 21-day challenge. So a 21-day challenge, it's research shows it takes 21 days to create a habit. To do something, you have to do it in an iteration of 21 days. And it has to be, I don't know if you all have heard of SMART goals, but it has to be kind of through the lens of SMART goals. So attainable, sustainable, all of the time bound, all the things that make it something that you can actually accomplish. So I have some examples here of things you can do. The first one is journaling, and it's maybe writing down 2 to 3 sentences in a day of something that went well. 2 to 3 sentences, that's it. Meditation, we already talked about, 2 minutes a day. So if you do that for 21 days, you're much more likely to stick with that habit. Exercise, again, I already talked about that, 10 minutes a day. gratitude journals. So writing down 3 things you're grateful for every day. And I will say that as someone who was a pretty big naysayer on the 21-day challenge, I decided 3 years ago that I was going to try a 21-day challenge and said I was going to do a gratitude journal, but didn't have a lot of faith in myself. So I started doing a gratitude journal, and I think after like 4 or 5 days fell right off and was like, yep, that wasn't going to work for me. But then I decided, no, 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 I'm going to do this. I'm going to persevere. I'm going to figure out a way. So I set myself up for success. I put a journal on my bedside table. I had a pen and paper, a pen, and I had a nice little lamp that I could use. And every night before I went to bed, I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for. And I have 2 things to share about that. First is it doesn't have to be major things like world peace. I mean, that would be great, and I would be grateful for it. But it could be things like pizza. I was grateful for pizza today. It was so good, And so that was one thing. The other thing is 3 years later, still doing it. And I have to say, I cannot believe I still do it. But now I have journals full of gratitudes that I can draw back on. And it's been a pleasant surprise. And I don't know about all of you, but for me, I'm one of those people who's a ruminator, just constantly going and going and going in my head. So this has really given me an opportunity when I'm going to bed to draw upon gratitudes and really kind of find a way to shift my thinking towards things that I'm grateful for. A final example of a 21-day challenge, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So this is my friend Scotty. We lived in Chicago together. Scotty is truly as goofy as he looks. There's his name, so you can remember it. So Scotty is the life of the party, a fun guy, a kind, nice, funny guy. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Chicago, but we have L trains there, which is the way that many people commute to and from work and across the city. And Scotty every day would take the L train to work. And one day, Scotty was walking to the L train and he got jumped by a group of people, and they stole his stuff and beat him up pretty badly. And this happy go lucky guy kind of got a dark cloud over his head. And no matter what we, his friends group, did to try and cheer him up, he was just kind of doom and gloom. He was not happy. He was pretty embarrassed and scared and all of those things. And it was really sad to see Scotty, experiencing this way. So, he still went to work every day and he still got on the train. And one day he walked to the train, and outside of the train stations in Chicago, there's newspaper stands. And Scotty picked up a newspaper, got on the train car, and made himself a paper hat. And then decided that he alone shouldn't have a paper hat. So he made one more and silently handed it to the person next to him. That person put on the hat and they went to work with a paper hat on their head. The next day, Scotty went again, grabbed a paper, and this time made a few paper hats, one for himself and one for a couple of other people on the train, and they put them on. And this happened day after day after day. And Scotty became known as the paper hat guy on the train. And this became a Chicago-wide sensation that there was this guy who made paper hats on the train. And here is a picture that a news article picked up, a quote from it. I like it. It's nice to be given something, even if it is a paper hat. And it's nice to have a thought that follows you the rest of the day and simply brightens it. And what this did, this random act of kindness, being a paper hat, it lifted the dark cloud off of Scotty's head and put a paper hat on it. But it lifted that dark cloud and created a lot of positivity for other people. So another thing you can do for a 21-day challenge is random acts of kindness. And this is one example of a very creative and amazing 21-day challenge. Although he hadn't planned it to be that, it was just too good to pass up as an example. So I know I am coming to a close. I had put in some more things I want to just give. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides so I can take time for questions, but I do want to read this quote about adjusting your mindset. Studies have shown that our beliefs can affect our abilities. More important still than believing in your own abilities is believing that you can improve these abilities. And I say that because we really do have the ability to shift our mindset to create more positive outcomes, to put ourselves in situations where even in the toughest times, we're able to be more resilient, and that will have an impact on you and your patients and anyone else in your life. So I'm going to go here real quick. Another thing I just want to touch on is this idea that's called the Tetris Effect. It's a metaphor for being stuck in a pattern of thought or behavior. When we are looking for something, we see it everywhere. And the idea here is that our minds kind of map to whatever it is that we see. And Tetris is an example because there's a research study out there where a researcher basically paid people to play Tetris all day, every day for a period of time and asked them how they felt after the, you know, time period that they'd be playing it. And basically, they all saw Tetris everywhere they went. They'd go to the grocery store and they'd be like, I want to set the boxes up in a certain way. So the idea is their mind actually mapped or printed Tetris. And our minds also print negativity. We are sponges for negativity. And in fact, there's research out there that suggests it takes 3 to 6 positive things or experiences to take away one negative experience. And what that means is we're consistently operating in a deficit. So anything that you can do to contribute to that positive experience, is good because it helps to deplete that deficit and really put you into a place where you are shifted to a more positive way of thinking, interacting, and being productive. And so it's just something to think about. You have the power to shift it, but oftentimes we don't think too much about that and we just kind of fall into suit of what we are socialized to do, and that is to really pick up on negativity. Um, I'll leave that there. And then I'm going to read you this quote by Maya Angelou. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. And this isn't an easy thing to embrace. So I'm going to finish with this final slide here. Another quote: we can only learn to deal with failure by actually experiencing failure, by living through it. The earlier we face difficulties and drawbacks, the better prepared we are to deal with the inevitable obstacles along our path. And that is by a research scientist named Tal Ben Shahar. And I just wanted to give an example of what that can look like. So when you think of Walt Disney, fired let me rephrase that. Walt Disney was fired because they said he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. What? The guy created Disney, which is one of the most creative and amazing media platforms. Oprah Winfrey publicly fired from her first television job as an anchor in Baltimore for getting too emotionally invested in her stories. What made Oprah Winfrey who she is? Getting invested emotionally in her stories. And finally, Michael Jordan, who was cut from his high school basketball team, but also the best basketball player that's ever existed. And usually when I do that in person, I see people make faces because they may disagree, but there really is nothing to disagree about because he could fly through the air. Anyways, the whole point of this slide is to say that even when you're knocked down, plenty of people might tell you you can't do this or it won't work or no way. And this goes for your patients too. There are ways to not just say, I can do something. There are ways to thrive because of it. And that's all built around resilience and the power of resilience and the ability to bounce back from hardship of any kind and thrive in the face of it. So I leave you with the question: what can you do I guess it's questions, but what can you do today, next week, next month, next year? And I encourage you to write down one thing. It doesn't have to be all of the questions there, just one, because 42 people who write down something that they're going to do or change are 42% more likely to actually make that change. So, if you have a pen and paper, a quick little write down will potentially, it gives you 42% more of a chance to actually do what you say you're going to try and do. So with that, I'm sorry I breezed through a few of those slides, but I did want to give a time for questions if folks have them.
Thank you, Robin. And while we wait for folks to put their question in the chat, I'm going to put that evaluation link in the chat once again, just so that they have it. And while you're thinking about your questions, I have a couple here for Robin. So the first one that I have is, can only one of the 7 daily happiness goals be enough to, say, reduce stress, or do we need multiple at a time?
Um, I think that each of them can contribute to stress reduction, and probably the more that you incorporate, the better. Obviously, you don't want to overwhelm yourself and feel like you are taking up all of your time doing all of the things, but any which way you can incorporate those things into your day to day. Again, the whole point of them is that they're not that much of a heavy lift. The more, you know, I can't say 100% sure, but like the better the likelihood that you will experience more positive outcomes. And so one will make a difference, 5 will make a difference. And, it's just a matter of um, how much capacity you have to integrate those into your life. But even one will make a difference.
Thank you. And then another question we have is, what can we do if it seems like nothing eases our mind, de stresses us, or the world just seems against us?
Sure. And, I know that this is all based in positive psychology, and sometimes it feels very unattainable to get to that place given any circumstances that might just be weighing you down. So the whole idea is that if you're practicing these things at all times in some way, shape, or form, in those times that you are struggling a bit more, when it does feel like the world is against you, um, then you kind of have almost reserves. And that's how this resilience piece comes in. Not everyone is going to, in their worst moment or when they feel like they're struggling the most, be able to do some of the things that I listed, but having them all along just helps to build your capacity to manage adversities when they come along.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like there are questions at the moment, but we still do have some time, so I will allow for that now and just see if any more questions pop in.
Sure thing. I have a question for the people on the call, if you're willing to type it into chat. Has everyone heard of adverse childhood experiences? So we're at 50% right now. um, I'm just curious because, and it does sort of matter based on what position you're in, but anyone who is in healthcare should be familiar with that. And I think for those of you who are, you're probably going to be hearing about it more and more as it is becoming more of a priority, at least in public health, and that'll likely have a ripple effect. And it's very much connected to COVID, um, as COVID in itself is kind of an ace for young people. Ramon, it sounds like they talked about it in a parenting class. That's not surprising. Yeah, it's especially in adoption situations. They like to talk about that quite a bit. And congratulations on your impending adoption.
Okay, it is looking like there are no more questions, but if you do have questions following the webinar, you can email me or Robin and we can get those questions answered for you.
Oh
And I would
yeah,
just
here
like
you go.
I would just like to thank Robin again for participating today and being the presenter on this topic. It was very insightful. And um, we do encourage you to take that webinar evaluation. I will put into the chat one more time. Just we appreciate your feedback and ways we can improve in the future and things like that. And Robin, I will let you say a few words if you would like to now.
Just thank you for everyone who attended, and I hope that, especially given our current times, that you found this information to be helpful and relevant. Some of it is probably common sense, but I think that it's so important to remind ourselves of some of this, and it really does impact the patients you care for and just in general anyone that you interact with in a day to day, because there's so much happening right now. This is really crucial for us to be paying attention to take care of ourselves and in turn take care of others. So thank you very much. Please feel free to email me if you do have any follow-up questions. Happy to talk this through more.
Thanks, Robin. And thank you, everybody who attended today. And with that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great holiday season coming up.
Take care, everyone. Happy holidays.